The lights were bright but not blinding. Manny Pacquiao sat calmly in the center of the studio, his suit pressed to perfection, his shoes polished, his demeanor relaxed yet unmistakably distant. Cameras framed his face from 3 angles, but he was used to this kind of orchestration. He had lived most of his adult life under the watchful eyes of lenses, microphones, and headlines. Interviews had become routine, rehearsed. He could navigate them with the grace of a dancer, tracing steps long memorized. The interviewer, a poised woman in her early 40s, leaned forward with a friendly smile, a clipboard balanced delicately on her lap. She had done her research. Her questions, though gentle, probed chronologies and milestones that Manny had recited hundreds of times before. His rise from poverty in General Santos City, the sacrifices of his youth, the improbable climb to boxing superstardom, it was all there, presented like chapters from a book he'd grown tired of reading aloud. He answered everything with practiced humility, that soft, measured tone that had won over fans beyond the ring. A chuckle here, a shrug there, gracious, diplomatic. But behind the polite responses and the occasional glint in his eyes, something deeper loomed. Not sadness exactly, but a silence. A long silence that lived inside him, a silence born not from trauma but from time. Time that had passed, people who had vanished, words that had never been said. The interviewer shifted to lighter territory. She asked about his children, his new responsibilities in politics, his faith, his plans for the future. He spoke of service, of gratitude, of his hope for the Filipino people. The words came easily, but even as he spoke them, he felt slightly removed, as if his voice belonged to someone else. And then she paused, just long enough to break rhythm. A brief glance to the crew behind the cameras. A signal. Manny noticed, but said nothing. The interviewer adjusted her posture, leaned in, and her voice softened. "Manny," she said, "we wanted to do something a little different today. We have someone who wanted to say a few words to you." He looked at her, confused. "Someone?" She nodded, a warm smile hiding something deeper. "Just listen." The studio fell still. The lights hummed quietly overhead. The sound engineer lifted a hand. A soft static filled Manny's earpiece. And then it happened. A voice. A crackling voice. Rough, aged, but unmistakably familiar. "Manny, do you remember the day you lost in Gensan? The first time you came back to the gym with your head down? I told you then. A real fighter doesn't lose, and he learns. And you learned." The moment froze. Manny blinked once. His breathing slowed. The air shifted. That voice, it was like hearing a dream spoken aloud. You were just a kid back then. Angry, hungry. You trained until your knuckles bled. You didn't know how to jab properly, but you had fire. I saw it. I knew. Manny's lips parted, barely a whisper escaping. "Coach." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the crew, usually disengaged during interviews, had paused. Something sacred was unfolding. His eyes clouded. Slowly, his body leaned forward, as if trying to get closer to the sound. But it wasn't just a sound. It was a time machine. It was 1995. Again. The gym, the sweat, the echoes of rope snapping against wood. And above all, that voice, his voice. "Coach Fernandez," Manny murmured. And then he broke. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't performative. His hands came to his face, but not to hide, only to hold, to contain something that could not be contained. Tears spilled freely, tracing lines down a face that had absorbed years of punches without flinching. He had taken body shots from legends, cuts above both eyes, but this was something else. This was memory. This was home. The interviewer sat frozen. She reached instinctively for a tissue, but something told her to stay still. This wasn't a moment to fix, and it was a moment to witness. Manny tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He looked toward the monitor now glowing to his left. The face on the screen, older, thinner, wearing glasses now, smiled. "It's been a long time, anak," said Coach Amado Fernandez. "You promised you'd come back to the gym one day. I waited." Manny wiped his face with trembling fingers. "I didn't know you were still alive." The coach laughed, dry and hoarse. "I didn't know you still remembered me." What do you say to the man who first believed in you? Not in your fame, not in your money, but in your fists, in your heart. What do you say to the man who once taped your hands before you entered the ring with nothing but borrowed shorts and a prayer? Manny took a breath. His voice was shaky but firm. I remember everything. And he did. He remembered the cracked mirrors in the gym, the sour smell of gloves left too long in the heat. He remembered how Coach Fernandez would wake him at 5 a.m., clapping his hands like thunder, yelling, "You want to be champ or not, then run!" He remembered the scoldings, the silence after a poor spar, the rare nod of approval after a clean hook. And he remembered the day he left, the way he had. Promised to come back, to bring money, to say thank you properly. But life got in the way. Wins turned to fame, fame turned to politics. Time slipped like sweat on the canvas, and the coach became a memory, until now, the coach spoke again. I watched every fight. Even when the TV didn't work, I listened on the radio. When you knocked down Hatton, like when you beat De La Hoya. I shouted so loud the neighbors thought I'd gone mad. Manny laughed through tears. You never told me. I didn't need to. I always knew you'd hear me someday. And now he had. The interview never quite resumed. The cameras stayed on, but the format dissolved. It wasn't about the title belts anymore, or the number of wins or legacy. It was about this, the quiet power of gratitude, the invisible thread between past and present, the truth that no champion rises alone. Manny sat back in his chair. The tears had dried, but his heart was still open, still raw. For the first time in a long while, he felt something deeper than victory. He felt peace. Later, off camera, as the crew packed up, Manny asked for a private line. He wanted to speak. To the coach, just the two of them, no lights, no audience. And when he picked up the phone, he said one thing. I should have called sooner, but I never stopped hearing your voice, coach. Never. And on the other end, a quiet reply. You called at the right time. The bell hasn't rung yet. We still have one more round to go. Before he was the Pac-Man, before the stadium lights and the pay-per-view millions, before the roaring of crowds and the glitter of championship belts, there was a barefoot boy with bruised knuckles and a stomach that never felt full. The slums of General Santos City were not kind to dreamers. They were even less kind to children. Manny was both. He came from a place where dreams often died quietly, not with a crash but a slow fade into the everyday fight for food, safety and sleep. But something burned in him, something that couldn't be put out by hunger or heat. Even at age 14, he punched the air like it had insulted his future. Coach Amado Fernandez found him outside the gym, watching from a distance. The boy didn't say much, just kept staring through the chain-link fence at the fighters inside, mimicking their moves. Day after day, he returned. One day, Coach opened the gate and threw him a pair of hand wraps. Wrap up or get lost, he grunted. That was the beginning. Amado was not a man of praise. He had the temperament of a welder, all sparks and steel. He didn't believe in gentle encouragement. He believed in repetition, in pain, in pushing past the voice in your head that said enough. He yelled, he corrected, he demanded. But he also saw something in Manny that no one else had bothered to look for. Not just talent, but defiance, a refusal to stay small. The boy was a mess in the ring at first, his feet tangled, his punches were wild. He tried to fight with emotion, not technique. Amado slapped the back of his head more times than he could count. You want to win with rage? Go fight in the street, he barked. You want to be a boxer? Then learn control. Manny learned. He started showing up earlier than anyone else. He ran before sunrise. He shadowboxed in silence. He punched until his shoulders ached and his ribs stung. Amado taught him to breathe, to step, to wait. Not just to punch, but to punish. They built something together, rep by rep, round by round. Not just a fighter, a bond. At first it was a relationship built on silence and sweat, but slowly it grew. Coach started giving him leftovers from his own meals. He made sure the boy had shoes. He paid for him to ride home when it rained. When Manny's mother got sick, Coach didn't say anything, just handed him a folded bill and said, "Don't waste this." Manny didn't have the words for it then, but looking back, he knew. Amado Fernandez had been more than a coach. He had been a second father, a quiet protector, the one who saw not just fists, but the boy behind them. But life, as it often does, moved faster than promises. When Manny got his first invitation to fight in Manila, it was Coach who packed his bag. He didn't show any emotion, just made sure the gloves were clean, the wraps were folded, and the boy had enough food for the road. Before Manny boarded the jeepney, Coach handed him a small pendant, a worn crucifix on a fraying string. "You're not ready," he said. "But you never will be, that's why you'll win." Manny nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll come back," he said. "I'll bring you something. I'll just win," Coach said, turning his back. And so he did, the war. Wins came fast like a rising tide. Manila turned to Thailand. Thailand turned to America. One victory bled into the next. With each fight, Manny became less of a secret and more of a... "Coach isn't here," the boy said. "He doesn't come as often." Manny left a message, "Tell him I won," but he never heard back. The more he climbed, the further everything below seemed to fall. He hired new trainers, strength coaches, nutritionists, cornermen who wore matching shirts and smiled for cameras. He told himself it was necessary, part of the business, part of the brand. He still thought of Coach, sometimes late at night, before the music started and the crowd roared. But there was always another fight, another stage, another obligation. Then came the scandals, the losses, the aging body, and finally retirement. When Coach's voice echoed through that studio years later, it was like being punched in the soul. It brought back everything, not just the memories, but the guilt. Because while Manny had risen, Coach had stayed. The old gym barely survived. Most of the equipment was rusted. The roof leaked during rainy season. Fewer boys showed up now. They preferred phones and screens to sweat and bruises. But Coach kept going. Even when the arthritis made him wince, even when his back gave out, he kept showing up. Because maybe, deep down, he believed that one day the boy would return. Not the champion, not the senator, the boy. After the interview ended, they spoke every night. Phone calls that started stiff but softened quickly. Laughter returned, so did apologies. Manny offered money, repairs for the gym, a house. Coach waved it all away. "You already gave me what I wanted," he said. "You made it, you honored the fight," but Manny couldn't let it rest. He dug up old letters he never sent, emails he started but never finished. He watched old footage of his early fights, hearing Coach's voice in the background, shouting advice, cursing, cheering. He realized something strange. For all the world's attention, it was that voice that had always mattered most. Coach Fernandez never asked for credit, never showed up to press conferences, never claimed a piece of the fame. He wasn't in documentaries or magazine features. He didn't care. He knew who Manny really was. Not the 8-division world champion, not the political figure, just the kid who bled on the mat and got back up every time. Now hearing that voice again, it haunted Manny. Not with regret, but with responsibility. He had one more fight, one more promise to keep. And it wouldn't be in Vegas or under the lights or in front of millions. It would be back in the place where it all began. The old gym, the rusted bags, the cracked mirror, and the man who never stopped watching, even when the whole world did. The morning air in General Santos City was thick with memory, humid and heavy, the kind that clings to skin and thought alike. It had been over 2 decades since Manny had walked those streets without an entourage, without camera flashes or curious glances. This time there were no sponsors, no bodyguards, no media vans parked at the corners. Just Manny, in a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and a cap pulled low over his brow. He didn't come to be seen. He came to remember. Every corner held a ghost. The alley behind the bakery where he used to sleep on cardboard. The jeepney terminal, where he first watched people bet on street fights. The Sari Sari store where he once borrowed instant noodles on credit. These weren't landmarks to anyone else, but to him, they were chapters. Each crack in the pavement was a word. Each smell, each shadow, a sentence. The old gym was still there, barely. The sign had faded to near illegibility, sun-bleached and cracked. The roof sagged in places. Few punching bags still hung, though they looked like they'd burst with one good hook. The ring in the center had more duct tape than canvas. The floor squeaked. The walls, once painted a proud red and white, were now a patchwork of grime and mold, but it was still standing. That mattered more than anything. He entered quietly. The door creaked as it always had. The same smell greeted him: sweat, leather, and old wood. It hit him like a right cross to the chest. Coach Fernandez was sitting on a bench near the far wall, holding a small clipboard, though he didn't seem to be writing anything. His body had aged, thinner, slower, but the posture was still unmistakable. Upright, alert, present. Manny approached slowly, unsure if he should speak or wait to be noticed, but Coach didn't look up. Not yet. So Manny sat beside him, leaving a respectful gap between them. For a moment, neither said anything. The silence was thick but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that came only between people who had shared something bigger than words, something closer to blood. Finally, Coach spoke, his voice soft, almost amused. "Took you long enough." Manny exhaled a quiet laugh. "I know." Coach turned his head. Their eyes met. No anger, no resentment. Just tired gratitude. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said. "You used to be half my size." "You used to yell a lot more," Manny replied. Coach chuckled, dry and low. "I still do, just not as loud. Doesn't work on the new kids. They don't respond to shouting, too soft." They both looked out at the ring, empty now still. Dust floated lazily in the beams of light slipping through the roof cracks. "I thought I'd come back one day," Manny said, "but every time I thought about it, I also remembered how much I owed you, and it became harder. Like the longer I waited, the bigger the debt." Coach shook his head. "I never wanted anything from you, just wanted you to fight right. Keep your chin down, lead with the jab, and never quit." "I didn't." "No, you didn't," Coach said. "Though you fought like hell, I watched everything. You were beautiful in that ring, boy, pure chaos and disciplined chaos, and that's the rare kind." Manny lowered his head. "Still felt like I left something unfinished here." "You did," Coach said, "but not in the way you think. It wasn't a promise you broke, it was a part of yourself you tried to leave behind." Manny looked at him. "Fighters don't get to keep everything," Coach said, nodding toward the ring. "Every punch takes something. Every win gives something else. Glory replaces innocence. Pain replaces peace. We trade. That's what we do." They sat like that for a while. No one entered the gym. The city buzzed faintly outside, but inside, it was just them, two men on a quiet battlefield. Manny reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He opened it slowly, reverently, revealing a miniature golden belt. Not a real championship belt, but a symbolic one, engraved delicately at the base. "To my first coach, to the man who taught me to fight, not just in the ring." Coach stared. Had it, didn't touch it. His throat moved, but no words came out. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," Manny said. "Because no matter how many belts I won, none of them mean anything without this one. Without you." Coach reached out, fingers trembling, and took the box. He held it close to his chest, not for show, but like someone protecting something fragile, sacred. "You were always going to be special," Coach said. "Not because you hit hard, because you listened." They stood slowly and walked toward the ring. Coach placed a hand on the ropes, feeling their give. He sighed. "I think I've got one more round in me." Manny smiled. "Then let's go." They didn't spar, they didn't hit mitts. They just stood in opposite corners, then stepped forward and touched gloves as they had so many years ago. An old ritual, a silent prayer. Coach circled. So did Manny. For a moment they shadow-boxed, not against each other, but against time. Against the years they'd lost, against the echoes that still hung in the air, and then they stopped. Coach leaned on the ropes, catching his breath. "That's enough. I won." Manny grinned. "You always did." They left the ring together. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden haze over the rooftops, Manny and Coach sat outside the gym on a worn stone bench. People passed by, some recognizing Manny, some not. A few waved, none interrupted. "You going back to Manila?" Coach asked. "Tomorrow," Manny said, "but I'll come back, not 20 years from now, sooner." Coach nodded. "Bring your kids next time. I'll show them how to throw a real hook." "I will." They sat in comfortable silence again. Birds chirped overhead. A breeze kicked up dust from the street. Coach looked out across the neighborhood, his eyes glassy. "You know," he said, "I thought I'd die here, forgotten. Just another old man yelling at boys who didn't listen." "You weren't forgotten," Manny said. "Not for a second." Coach reached out, put a hand on Manny's shoulder. "I didn't make you a champion. You were that already. I just helped you see it." Manny placed his hand over Coach's. "You did more than that. You gave me a reason to believe in myself when no one else did." Coach squeezed his shoulder. "Then I did my job." That night, Manny stayed in the old neighborhood. No hotels, just a modest house down the street from the gym. He ate dinner with Coach, simple rice and vegetables, no fanfare. Just stories, laughter, reminders of who he was before the world claimed him. As he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Manny felt something rare. The quiet kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but settles in the bones. The next morning, before leaving, he returned to the gym one last time. The sun was barely up. The streets were empty. He stood in the ring alone, closed his eyes, listened. And in that silence he heard it, Coach's voice, clear as day, cutting through the years. "Real fighters don't lose, they learn." Manny nodded to no one. "I'm still learning, Coach. Always." He stepped down from the ring, walked out the door and disappeared into the morning light. Not as a legend, not as a politician, not even as a fighter, just as a man who had come home.